Hello, good day. Today we'll be looking at Prelim Practice Paper 3. Let's jump right into the question. So first off, I would like to advise students to annotate their notes fully, or rather their questions fully. This will help you understand the demands of the questions and help you hit all the points that is required to get the marks. So I will be externalizing my thoughts. Having my thoughts, I will think aloud so you can see how I annotate. Alright? Sherry prepared the following setup using blocks A, B, C, and D, which are of different masses and sizes. She dropped A from height H into a tray of sand, after which she removed block A and measured the depth of the depression in D as shown in the diagram below. So after dropping block A, this is the depression they are talking about. She repeated the experiment using blocks A, B, C, and D and recorded the results of her experiment in the table below. So right off the top, when we look at this question, I noticed that there is just not one change variable. There are a few change variables if you take a look at it. However, we do have one common measured variable. So whenever you see an experimental question, the first thing to do is really to find what is your measured and what is your change variable. Now for change variable in this case, we do have two. One is actually your mass, and another one is your area of contact. This is something that is not usually seen in the question, so let's see what does the question want us to do. First question, based on the above results for the blocks of the same mass, what is the relationship between area contact with sand and the depth of depression formed? So this is basically a relationship question. So you know, in relationship question, right, there is a format for answering this. So you can say as something increases or decreases, comma, something increases or decreases. Right? So this is a sentence framework that I'm sure many of teachers have taught you to answer. Then the next thing we realize is that area of contact is the next thing, and the depth of the depression. And they also want blocks that are of the same mass. So when you look at it, you have to look at the mass, and I would actually go right ahead to do some annotations. Maybe use a ruler and draw out the data that they want us to look at. So the data that they really want us to look at would be just A, B, C, because only these three are the same mass. So looking at such, if you look at the area of contact, alright, as it actually decreases, the depth of the depression will actually increase. Okay, you do realize that? So what I would do is, usually I would draw an arrow down, and then I would actually say that this is decreasing. So because this is decreasing, and then I look at the other side, which is my measured variable, this is actually increasing. I would write this down so that when I formulate my answer, it's rather straightforward. So usually we also follow the order of arrangement, cause and effect. So in this case, this is the cause, and then this is the effect, measured variable. So when you look at it, I would say that the cause would be as the area of contact with the sand decreases, the depth of depression actually increases. So if I'm going to pen it down, it would look like as the area of contact with the sand decreases, the depth of depression increases. Alright, so this actually follows the format of the earlier sentence framework that I told you about when it comes to relation questions. Now, next. The experiment was repeated with block D. Block D had the same size and area of contact with sand as block C, but had a smaller mass. State whether the depth of depression caused by D was more than, less than, or same as block C. So in the first place, let's go ahead and highlight some things. Now, we realize that in this case that there is only one change variable because the size as well as the area of contact is the same. This over here, which is the mass, this is the change, is a change variable, and that's the only change variable. Now, if we take a look at block D, they're asking you what could be the depth of depression when you compare D with C. So, firstly, we have to ask ourselves, what causes this depression, right? So in the first place, what causes this depression will be the fact that you have different amount of gravitational potential energy. So why is this two, what is the cause of, how do you actually increase gravitational potential energy? So right off the top, we know that this depth, okay, is related to GPE, gravitational potential energy. And gravitational potential energy is basically affected by, okay, your two things. Now, we know that the two things, number one, would be height. Literally in terms of location. What is the height? How many meters above the ground? The higher you are above ground, the greater your GPE. The second thing that you're affected by would be your mass. The greater the mass, the greater amount of GPE. So when you take a look at this two that we're comparing, let me just go ahead and use a different color to highlight this out. Okay, when you look at this two, you realize that your mass, when you compare C and D, D is actually lower, right, compared to C. So this tells me that it actually has a lower GPE, which is converted as the object is falling over here. This is actually KE to a lower amount of KE, and that causes a smaller depression by D. Alright, so if you're going to pen it down, make sure that you pen it down in a sequential manner. So when we need to identify and realize that this is actually a energy conversion question. So in energy conversion questions, right, you have to say what is the original type of energy, and then what it was being converted to, and then from that what is being converted to. And if you are comparing two items, C and D, you have to talk about higher and lower, more or less. So it is a superlative question. So if I'm going to pen it down, it would look something like this. Okay, so I would say that the depression caused by D is less than C. Then you go on to explain. So remember, we talk about sequential forms of energy. So the first form of energy in this case is actually GPE, so which is affected by mass. So I would say that D has a lower GPE, gravitational potential energy, than C, which is then converted to less kinetic energy, okay, causing a lower depression. Now, usually when you have things like lower than or lesser than, you have to tell me lower than what, lesser than what. So if I'm going to be really complete, I will say D has a lower GPE as compared to block C. However, because in this case, in your question stem, there are only two. So obviously, if you use lower or higher than, you are comparing with C. It cannot be any other blocks. However, just to be careful, you might want to just put in that you're comparing with C. So I'm just going to exemplify that for you. Okay, there you go. Right, we're skipping these two questions. We're skipping question 30 and 31 as well. We're jumping straight to question 32. Right, so in question 32, okay, first things first, I always tell my students, try to identify what is the question topic on. So right off the start, we see a lot of words that is giving us help. Donna carried an experiment on the germination of seeds using two containers A and B. She placed both containers in the classroom near an open window. So right off the start, I see words like germination, I see near open window. So germination, open window. So an open window signifies that there is sunlight. And germination of seeds just tells me that, this could signal to me that it's talking about reproduction in plants, all right, and specifically on the topic of germination. And when I see germination, I think of factors affecting rate of germination, and that could be my wow factors, WOW, which I will talk more about it in a while. All right, and we've got two diagrams here. Now, whenever I've got two diagrams, I would actually look at these two and compare what exactly is the difference when they give you two different types of experimental setup. So in A, we have got seeds and wet cotton wool, that's all. However, in B, we have got cooled boiling water and a layer of oil. So sometimes these things are put in there to really test you whether or not you know what is needed for germination, right? Okay. So let's move on. What will Donna observe about the seeds in both containers A and B after 2 days? So since we already know that this question is obviously on germination, and they're testing us on what should link up in our mind is what are the factors affecting rate of germination? Will it even happen? All right. Okay. So let's take a look. We know that. Okay. Why is there cooled boiled water and why a layer of oil? Now, where we see the difference between these two, we must ask ourselves, why is the question adding these two additional variable in B? How does it affect my experiment setup? So we know that for cooled boiled water actually removes away dissolved oxygen. Okay, so there's no more oxygen. That's why the boiled water is there. And then after that, the layer of oil in this case potentially could either prevent evaporation, some might argue, or actually it would prevent oxygen from being dissolved, okay, in the water. So technically in setup B, I can say that there's no oxygen, right? And then when I think about it, I will ask myself, this setup is trying to prevent any oxygen from happening. How does this actually affect germination? So let's talk about our wow factor. Now, in order to germinate, we know that the wow factors are needed. What's the wow factors? WOW. So it stands for water, oxygen, and warmth. So these three factors are needed in order for germination to happen. So when you look at the two setups, right, you know that you can go right and check it out, okay, that in setup A, there is warmth, because it's exposed to sunlight. There is water because it's wet. Okay, and there is oxygen in the air. So all three are checked. And I know that the seeds in container A will germinate. However, for B, that's not quite the case because oxygen has been removed. So while there was water and possibly some form of warmth, because it's left in the open, your oxygen is missing, right? So because of that, it will not germinate. So they ask you what will happen in both containers, so you have to talk about both containers. So obviously in A, you will see that it has germinated or started to grow or shoots appearing, but there's not B will have remained the same. Okay, so the seeds in A would have germinated. Use comparison words, while the seeds in B would have remained the same. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to say that the seeds have died, because sometimes it could be very difficult to define or to see based on observation, right? Because they say observe, right? Whether or not the seed have died or not, or whether the seed have rotted or not. Some seeds can be quite resilient and might take a little longer, all right? And also because due to the lack of oxygen, bacteria doesn't grow that well, decomposition may be slowed down. So I will just say it remained the same. So then they go on to ask you to explain. All right, so explain, the explanation, I have done it already. So we're just going to pen it down according to what I've explained earlier. So the seeds in container A germinated as air, which is your oxygen, warmth, and moisture were present. The seeds in B did not germinate because even though there were warmth and water, the layer of oil prevented air from reaching the seeds. All right. Okay, moving on to the next question. One look at this, even before I read the question, I would have known that this is actually a question on cells. Now, with a question on cells, you definitely have to memorize structures together with its function. And when you're answering, also try and answer structure together with function. This is something given. It cannot be another way around. So let's dive right in. The diagram below shows two different cells, A and B, seen under the microscope. Observe two cells carefully and answer the questions that follow. Alright, then the question asks, which of the cells above these are plant cells? Explain your answer. Now, if you ask me what is the most obvious thing that all plant cells have, right? That will be the cell wall. That's the first thing I'm going to look for, which is the cell wall. Not so much a chloroplast, because there are plant cells that do not have your chloroplast. For example, your root cells. So your root hair cells, right, they do not have chloroplast because they are under the ground. Why would we need chloroplast since they cannot get any sunlight under the ground, right? So I will always look out for cell wall. Okay, this is the first thing. Yes, you may also look out for chloroplast, but the one that is to go to is always cell walls. So cell wall, they basically protect the cells from injury. They also give a regular shape, and hence you see that both cells are actually quite rectangular. But that may not be the case. I just want to clarify this point. A lot of students think that regular shape means rectangular. No, that's not true. Regular shape could mean things like hexagonal, pentagonal. Alright, it just means that it's got a more common shape rather than the blob, like an animal cell. So in this case, because both cells have your cell wall, I'm going to say that both of them would be your plant cells. Okay? So explain your answers. So you have to say both cell A and B are plant cells, as they both have cell walls found in plant cells. Now, I typically tell my students that you have to actually justify, and you have to tell me that these cell walls are found in plant cells and not animal cells. Because this justifies why finding cell walls in these cells actually proves that they are plant cells. If you're just going to tell me both cell A and cell B are plant cells as they both have cell walls, it doesn't so-called link to the idea that because cell walls are only found in plant cells, that's why if you find cell walls in the cells, it means that it is actually a plant cell. Okay, so it's really important to add that point in. State one difference between cell A and cell B. Look at the picture, it's pretty obvious. I am seeing things like your chloroplast. That's the main difference, right? So in this question, very, very straightforward. They ask you to just state, right? Okay, so cell A has chloroplast, but cell B does not. Now, then they go on to ask you, explain the difference in function of cell A and B due to the difference stated in part B. Now, you have to memorize all the various functions of the plant cell parts. No second way around it, okay? Now, you have to explain that cell A has chloroplast. Now, ask yourself, what is the main function of chloroplast? So the main function of chloroplast is basically to trap sunlight for photosynthesis. So make sure that keywords like photosynthesis, trap sunlight, chlorophyll, they are all there. Okay, and then you have to say that, but cell B, okay, is not able to carry out photosynthesis or make food. So if I'm going to pen it down, it'll be like this. So cell A has chloroplast, which contains chlorophyll, that is the green pigment in chloroplast, to trap sunlight. Actually, it's not sunlight, my apologies, but light energy. Okay, to trap light for photosynthesis. But cell B is not able to photosynthesize due to the lack of chloroplast. Now, if you cannot spell the word photosynthesize, make food is fine. Alright? Moving on to question 34. The diagram below shows the movement of water in a plant. Okay, so right off the top, movement of water in a plant. things that should come to my mind, topic would be transport in plants. And when I talk about movement of water, I'm thinking of xylem. I'm also thinking of water together with dissolved mineral salts. Okay, so with that in mind, let's move on. So it tells you from the roots, the stem to the leaves. Now what happened to the water after it reaches the leaves? Oh, okay. So ask yourself this question. Now, when it reaches the leaves, okay, what will happen to the water, right? Okay, there are a few things that could happen. In fact, there are two plausible answers to this. All right. So one, when it reaches the leaves, ask yourself, what is the function of the leaves? The function of the leaf will be the photosynthesize, right? That could be one function. So we know that water is needed. So your water could be used in photosynthesis. That's the first thing. Now, there is a second fate for your water. At night, well, your plant cannot be photosynthesizing when there is no light energy. So, but it doesn't mean that water stops getting drawn up to the leaves. So when it gets drawn up the leaves and it's no light, also remember that there is a second thing that could happen to your water, and that is called transpiration. Now, what is transpiration? So transpiration is basically the loss of water, vapor, through the stomata of the leaves. Okay, I hope that rings a bell. So I'm going to write down the two answers here just to give you a little bit more exposure. So I'm going to use two different colors. So the first one is the water in the leaves is used for photosynthesis. Now the second plausible answer would be the water in the leaves are lost as water vapor through the stomata. Of course, if your spelling is good, you can just straight away say the water in the leaves undergoes transpiration, or is lost through transpiration. Okay? Right, moving on, next question. The arrows below show the flow of blood in human body. Right off the top, I see words flow of blood, I see human body, I see diagram. Okay, it signals me that this has to be a circulatory question. Right? So what comes to my mind will be parts of a circulatory system in human beings. I've got my blood vessels, I've got my heart. Okay, I'm also thinking of the different substances that are being transported in the various blood vessels. Okay, so let's see. Other than direction of blood flow, state one difference between blood in W and blood in Y. W and Y. Okay, so this is a very typical question. They are actually asking you the composition of the blood. So what can be different? Usually we look out for these few factors. Give me a minute, let me just change it a bit thinner. So differences in blood. What are the few things that we can look out for? So we can look out for in terms of amount of digested food. We can look out for percentage or concentration of carbon dioxide, percentage of oxygen. Now do note, I'm using short form here, but please, in exams, you're not allowed to use short form, or you're not allowed to use the chemical formula. Alright, please spell out. Okay, so these are the three things we can look out for. So generally, we usually will look out for the first two, the second two, unless your digestive system is involved. So in this diagram, right, can you see that they didn't have any digestive system? Instead, they have lungs. So when you think about it, in lungs, we carry out something known as gaseous exchange, right? So gaseous exchange, the word gaseous will have hint you that, you're looking at carbon dioxide as well as oxygen. All right, now let's go through this. Now, how I like to always talk about this is I like to walk myself through the thought process because that is very clear. Now, we have to understand that when you respire, you take in carbon dioxide and you take in oxygen and you give out carbon dioxide. So basically blood that flows out from your other parts of body should be rich in carbon dioxide because it has undergone respiration, right? So, and we know that in respiration, you would actually take in oxygen and give out carbon dioxide. Because of that, this is actually rich in carbon dioxide. So, when the blood is rich in carbon dioxide, okay, your oxygen would definitely be low. These two are always the opposite of each other, okay? And then it goes, because it's low in oxygen, your heart would then pump the blood to your lungs, where gaseous exchange happen, right? So what are you exchanging? You are exchanging carbon dioxide for oxygen because you want oxygen. Oxygen is needed for respiration. So you will actually remember that from the heart, your oxygen content is in fact the lowest, I would say. And then your carbon dioxide content is the highest because it's accumulative, right? So as blood travels from here to here, your blood will have collected more carbon dioxide, okay, and then more of your oxygen would have been used up. So once it reaches your lungs, remember gaseous exchange actually happened. So remember I said that carbon dioxide is being exchanged for oxygen. So your lungs will give out carbon dioxide and take in oxygen. So whatever that comes out of your lungs now is rich in oxygen. In fact, it's the richest part in oxygen, and it'll be low in carbon dioxide. And then from there, okay, your heart will pump oxygen-rich blood to all other parts of your body so that respiration can happen. Okay, so I like to walk myself through it in this way because it's very clear and I'm able to visualize the whole sequence of how your oxygen composition actually changes. Some students prefer to memorize, okay? So they'll memorize like, okay, any blood that's coming out of the lungs, okay, that will be rich in oxygen and poor in carbon dioxide. Anything that is coming out from the heart, okay, depending on where it's going, if it's going to other parts, that will be rich in oxygen and low in carbon dioxide. So really is up to you, but the important thing is make sure you are able to justify why is that so, because in the explanation part you cannot just be saying that, oh, because I memorized it as such. You must be able to say that, oh, it's due to the gaseous exchange, so therefore blood exiting the lungs is now poor in carbon dioxide and rich in oxygen. Okay, so let's go ahead and answer this question. They wanted to compare W with Y. So I would say that W, because I've done my homework, okay, the difference. So I can either talk about carbon dioxide, I can talk about oxygen. So I'm going to talk about oxygen in this case. So I'll say that the oxygen content is actually lower as compared to the oxygen content in Y. Can you see this is up and this is down? Okay, so let's pen the answer down. So I will say that blood in W is poor in oxygen, but blood in Y is rich in oxygen. Okay, the word poor and rich is just a common word or common term used to describe the relative amount of gases in comparison. Okay, come, let's take a look at the next question. During science lesson, Simon learned that the walls of some blood vessels that carry blood to all parts of the body, like arteries, are very thick. He carried out an investigation on different grades of balloon of different thickness to better understand the purpose of a thick artery wall. Okay, so then they show you the steps of experiment. You measure the thickness, okay, and record it in the table. Exhale into balloon 5 times. Measure the diameter of the balloon after it has been inflated and record the measurement in the table below. Repeat steps 1 to 3 for balloon C. Okay? Alright, so then they show you a table. Now, based on the result of the experiment, explain why the artery that carries blood of the wall is thick. Okay, so this is a little bit like a CER question, but in this case, they are not exactly asking you for CER because they already state here that it needs to be thick, right? So it's more like an evidence and a reason question. Okay, I would say that this is a R and E question, or E and R question. So you need your evidence and you need your reason for it. So based on this, as you can see, you could not even measure the diameter of the balloon because when it's very thin, it bursts, right? So when you think about it, if your heart, if the artery or the blood vessels that needs to carry blood from one point to the other point, okay, definitely more pressure needs to be exerted on it. So you think of it in your everyday life, okay, when you have a water hose, right? When you want to actually spurt water out of a water hose, you would actually make the diameter of the water hose narrower, and a greater pressure will be exerted on the inner walls of your water hose, causing the water to gush out at a faster rate. So that's what's exactly happening in your system actually. Your heart has to pump extra hard, right? So your arteries are the ones that are nearest to your heart. So if this is your heart, your arteries are this. Okay, they are the nearest blood vessels to your heart, and therefore they experience the greatest amount of force. Okay, they will experience the greatest amount as blood flows through, because these arteries are the nearest to your heart. So in order to not burst, they have to be thick enough, right, to prevent it from bursting. And that is the reason behind it. So what this experiment does is that it actually exemplifies for you that when you have a very thin diameter or thickness, it will burst. And that was what will happen to your artery if it's experiencing high pressure and it's very thin. So the challenge now is to actually place your understanding into a written form. Alright, so remember this is a E and R question, evidence. So which is the one that actually will show you that you cannot be thin? So the one would be answer A. So you can quote that as an evidence. So I would say that based on the results, the balloon burst when it was the thinnest. Okay, I will put bracket A so that we know what we're talking about. Therefore, the walls of the artery has to be thicker. This is your reasoning. In order to withstand the greater pressure or force of blood being pumped by the heart. Alright? Okay, moving on. Next question. Okay, Siti set up the following experiment. Okay, she shone the light from the torch to material Y, which she had hung on the wall, and recorded the readings with a light sensor. She then repeated the experiment with materials W, X, and Y. The results are then shown in the table below. Okay, so in experimental setup, okay, before we even get to there, right off the top, I know I'm dealing with a question on light and shadows. The next thing I realize is that the change variable, which I have to annotate, is very important. So the change variable in this case would be your materials, and the measured variable would be the amount of light. Okay, let's go on. Why was the light sensor able to detect light from the torch even though the torch was placed behind it? Okay, so what it means is that your light sensor is here. They are asking you, why is it that you're able to detect the light even though it's placed behind the material and not in front of the material? So if it's in front of the material, it's very straightforward, right? Your light will have passed through the material and then you have detected, okay, if your sensor was over here. However, in this case, that's not what's happening. This experiment is probably not measuring the opacity, maybe not, okay, of the material, but rather the reflective index of the material. How much light can it reflect? So what would probably happen is that the light would have shone from the torch, it would have hit the material, and then it would have bounced off the material, and then it would have gone into the light sensor, alright, enabling it to actually detect the amount of light. Okay, so my answer would be the light from the torch reflected off the material and into the light sensor. Now, I must say that this is the keywords for this will be reflected. However, it is also important to tell me where is the light coming from, the light source, and where is it eventually going to. So I would say that the direction of the light is very important. From where to where, and then how. The how is the reflected part, the from is from the torch, the to will be your light sensor. Alright, based on the results of the experiment, which material, W, X, or Y, should be used to make road signs to enable drivers to see them clearly at night? Give a reason for your answer. So basically, for this, right, you need to understand that no. So for this question, right, you need to understand that you have to look at what are some of the key ideas? So it is at night and you want the road signs to be seen clearly. So think about it, when you are driving at night, you have a road sign. So this is a car, and then you have a road sign over here. So your driver is inside the car. Now, how would you then imagine where would the light source be, right? So remember, I talked about being able to identify the light source. So the light source in this case will be from the headlight. So from here, the light will shine, it will hit the signboard, and then it will be reflected into the eyes of the driver. So this is what needs to be happening in order for the driver to see the road sign. So one more time. Light from the light source of the car, headlights, hit the signboard, reflects into the eyes of your driver. Okay? So remember to identify your light source. So let's pen it down. So this is the light source, headlights, right? Reflects off signboard. Goes into the eyes. So in your answer, you have to actually mention all these points that we have annotated. And then after that, also think about, this is actually, what type of question? This is actually a CER question. So the claim in this case, right, if you look at your results, remember that you need the light to be reflected off. So obviously the more amount of light that it gets reflected off, the better it is. So of all the materials, you would find that Y is actually the most important, or rather it is the most reflective one, highest reflective index. Okay, how do you know that? Because your light sensor is able to detect the greatest amount of light. So which means that most light must have bounced off material W going into the light sensor. So how will your CER look like? So it will be something like your C will be Y. So evidence, material Y reflected the most light. Actually, sorry, can I just change this? I would say that the light sensor detected the most amount of light reflected by Y. This suggests that Y is able to reflect the most amount of light. Hence, or you can say road signs need to be able to reflect most amount of light into the driver's eyes for them to see clearly. Right? So we have our C here. our E here, and then lastly we have our R here. Okay. Next, city teacher said that the experiment should have been conducted in a dark room. Explain how this suggestion would improve city's experiment. Right off the top, this is actually a fair test question. You need to recognize it. Okay, so in a fair test question, there can only be one variable. In this case would be the type of material that is being hung on the wall. So if you do the experiment in an open room, the amount of light that varies in the room is an additional change variable. Okay, so the answer would be, this is to ensure that the only light sensed by the light sensor Okay, next. City noticed that material Y was used in the inner surface of a study lamp, which is here. Okay, based on the results earlier, explain why material Y was used. Okay, so basically, when you think about it, when you have something that was the most reflective material, it will reflect the light back down onto whatever work that she's doing, right? So by doing so, the most amount of light will be reflected to the surrounding, okay, making the study area even brighter. So you could state that material Y is the best reflector of light when used on the inner surface most light will be reflected making the study area brighter. So in a way, you are really focusing. Alright, maybe just to elaborate a little bit more. So imagine you are doing your work here. You want the light to focus, right, onto whatever you're doing. Okay, next, question 36. Tom conducted an experiment using a wooden block P and a flat wooden plank placed on the floor as shown below. Okay, what forces were acting on the wooden block as it rested on the wooden plank? Now, in this case, this is a question on forces. Now, this is actually a very common question. We need to understand that gravity is something that acts on every single object, and gravity acts on the same is the same per unit mass, okay, on Earth. So the answer, very straightforward, gravity. Next, Tom then placed one end of the wooden plank on a book as shown in figure 2, but the wooden P did not slide down. However, when another book was placed, the wooden block P slid down the wooden plank. Give a reason. So let's take a look at these two, figure 2 and figure 3. What is the difference? So the difference is that in 3, there is a height difference, right? So when you think about it in terms of forces or energy, okay, you look at this particular part. What we notice is that this over here has more height. So what it means is that your wooden block will actually have more GPE, gravitational potential energy, compared to your diagram 2, which is less GPE. So probably what we could say is that because there is more GPE and then there's movement, right? So more GPE actually equals to more conversion into KE, kinetic energy. And that is actually enough to overcome the frictional force. So we can say that more gravitational potential energy is converted to kinetic energy. Okay, so because of that, it's able to overcome the frictional force. Now, without raising the wooden plank or changing wooden block P, suggest another way, okay, to make it slide over a longer distance. Explain your answer. So first things first, we have to understand what is it that is stopping the block from moving down, and the answer is actually friction, right? So when we think about it, how do we actually ensure that it moves a greater range? Very simple. You reduce friction, which is the force opposing your wooden plank from going down, and that will actually makes it go further. Now, how do we reduce friction? The most common way that we teach our students would be to use a lubricant. Now, when you say you want to use a lubricant, okay, I always say, don't just say put lubricant, okay? Always give an example. So I will start off the answer by use or lubricate or put, okay? So I can say apply or put anything. Put oil, bracket, lubricant, which is, okay, if you don't want to write the whole statement, put oil, which is a lubricant, or put oil like lubricant, just bracket lubricant, okay, on the wooden plank. And then you would say that the oil will reduce friction between. Now, whenever you talk about friction, because it's a contact force, it needs to be between two surfaces. Okay, so what is it between? Between wooden block P and the plank. Okay, and that will enable it to move further. Alright, next question. Now notice that divers tend to jump on the springboard to help propel them upwards before jumping off the board. The diver will make a few turns before eventually diving into the water as shown below. So from here, jumps up, turns, and goes into the water. Fill in the blanks to show energy conversion, okay, of the diver from the point where he jumped on the springboard to the point where he is just about to enter the water, as shown in the diagram. Now, here's the thing, okay. So, when you talk about energy conversion, we must always remember that a few things. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be converted from one form to another. So, because it can only be converted from one form to the other, the sequence in which it is being converted needs to be clearly spelled out in your explanation. So what you can do to help yourself is to really run yourself through the whole entire process, telling yourself, okay, so because this has more, that's why that is converted to more form of energy, and then from that form of energy it gets converted to another form of energy. Okay, then you will not be lost. So let's take a look. Now, in the diver, what form of energy? Okay, so now you have chemical potential energy that comes from food. Now, the two most common things that at your level that you'll be learning that is chemical potential energy will be two. One is from food, another one is from batteries. So obviously this is a living human being. He doesn't operate on battery, he operates on food. So this chemical potential energy is being stored in the food, which is then converted. Okay, so he is bending his knees. It is this movement, right? He will need to bend his knees and then extend straight up again, right? That's how you do it. So bend your knees. The bending action of the knees is actually a form of movement, and then he straightens himself up. So that is actually movement. So whenever there is movement, we think of it as kinetic energy, right? Which is associated with movement. Now, then because he bends his knee, okay, this causes the board to actually bend a bit, right? That he straightens himself up. So when he does that, he's actually this kinetic energy of his is being transferred or converted to elastic potential energy in your springboard. And then when your springboard bends downwards, and then it moves upwards, there is movement. So therefore, it's kinetic energy again. Now, this kinetic energy is then transferred to the diver, which enables him to go up in the air. So because there is a height, we know that there is GPE, gravitational potential energy. So from there, okay, your gravitational potential energy is not the only thing that happens. Not only does your diver gains height, he is also moving, he's spinning. So there's movement, right? So in this case, there's also kinetic energy. Alright, and of course, okay, right, okay, and of course, in your springboard, when it returns back to its position, there's some like spring sound, and perhaps some friction between the feet or the mechanism of the board, alright, that causes the heat energy over here. Okay, now usually when they give you a conversion diagram like this, and they ask you to fill in the energy conversion, so far most of the question that I've seen, this is actually required in the next part of the question. If you get this correct, this will help you to get your second portion correct. So let's take a look. Why is it important for the diver to jump a few times on the springboard before jumping off the springboard? So when you think about it, okay, you are jumping. So the jumping part of it is talking about the kinetic energy that is being stored, that is being so-called given off in the diver. So this more kinetic energy, right, will actually result in more elastic potential energy, which will then give you more gravity potential energy, right? Gravitational potential energy. So it enables him to leap higher. Okay? So using this, you can actually help you formulate your answer. Okay? So more, sorry about that. So more elastic potential energy could be converted to more gravitational potential energy. Okay? Next, Then they ask, less splashes can be seen in the water when the diver enters in the water at point E with his hand stretched out, straight as seen in the diagram. Explain the reason why. So if you take a look at this, ask yourself, what is the difference between this and this person if he was to, enter the water like this, horizontally? So straight off the top, you will notice that the surface area in contact with the water is a lot bigger, right? Okay, as compared to this, which is just 1 point. So you can think about that. And then with that, let's relate it to a concept that we have learned before, which is actually air resistance. But in this case, we're not really talking about air resistance, we're talking about water resistance, right? So we must be able to transfer the knowledge from something that is we have commonly talked about to something that is more abstract or new. So in this case, it's water. So instead of talking about air resistance, we talk about water resistance. So we can say that the body, okay, if you can use the word streamline, that's great. Cannot, we can use the word has less exposed surface area to the water. Okay, so I'm going to use that, but of course if you can use streamline, good for you. Okay, has less surface area in contact with the water, hence reducing water resistance when entering the water. Alright. Next, question 38. Okay. Right off the top, we already know this is a question on magnets. So when it comes to magnet, a few things will come to my mind straight off the top. Light poles facing each other would repel, unlike poles facing each other would attract. Okay, what are the possible magnetic materials? Coins will come into play. Later you will see how it works. Alright, so let's jump in. So slide below show different ways 4 ring magnets A, B, C, D of the same mass and height can be arranged. Based on the above setup, Mary made the conclusion. Put in the columns provided, whether is it true, false, or not possible to tell. So let's take a look. The light poles of all the magnets are facing each other. Not true, because if you take a look at this, obviously the unlight poles are facing each other because they are attracting together, so that is false. The unlight poles of all the magnets are facing each other. Also not true, because can you see? Okay, these two are repelling each other. So false. Next, magnet A has a stronger magnetic strength than magnet B. You can't tell also, not possible to tell, because the only one that is repelling, alright, D is actually C and D. Whereas if you look at it, in this case, you can't really tell, because in this case you're not measuring. There is no one thing to measure. You are comparing A and B, but the only one that is in comparison with D as the common factor would be A and C. So in order to tell whether this is true or not, you will need another magnet whereby if this was actually B, then it's a fair comparison. Then the distance at which they are repelling each other, you'll be able to use that as a measured variable to tell whether is it true that A has a stronger magnetic strength, right? So in this case, no, it's not possible. Magnet C has a stronger magnetic strength than A. This is true because, as you can see, with these two, they are looking at D. This two is the same, but your change variable in this case is A and C. So yes, these two are making a comparison. So if you compare the distance that's being repelled, you would see that C is able to repel D further away. So this tells you it's got a stronger magnetic strength than A. So this is correct. Next. Okay, the diagram below shows a water tank used for flushing a toilet bowl. The flushing and refilling system is not shown in the diagram. Okay, after flushing, water enters and refills the tank. Water will stop flowing, okay, when it reaches level M. So M is here. Okay, I will draw a line. Keegan wanted to use less water to flush a toilet bowl. Laura suggested putting a plastic bottle filled with stones into the water tank as shown in the diagram above. Laura's method is based on the property of matter. State this property. Okay, so right off the start, they told you property of matter, right? Now, let's take a look at the mechanism of this refilling system. So it tells you that, okay, it will stop refilling once it reaches, okay, level M. So ask yourself, how does water actually reach level M? So the property by it is by filling up the space, correct? So basically, as soon as the space that is over here is filled up with water, you would be able to stop the water from flowing. So if you could just replace water with something else, in this case it would be your plastic bottle, alright, which also occupies space, then less water is needed to fill up all this space here, right? And then the water level will reach level M with less water, because part of the space would have already been occupied with stones. And then you notice throughout our whole description, we keep talking about space. So therefore, the property of matter that helps in this case is actually matter occupies space. Now moving on, explain how Laura's suggestion would help Keegan use less water to flush a toilet bowl. So like what I described earlier is about the fact that your plastic bottle is able to occupy space. So less water would then be required to fill up this space, because some of the space would have been taken up by the bottle if you put a bottle inside here. Alright? So let's pen it down. So we can say that the plastic bottle filled with stone will take up space in the tank. So because of that, less water is needed to fill the tank. Okay. Next part. Keegan placed an empty bottle onto the water tank to try and see it would reduce the amount of water used to flush the toilet bowl. Explain why Keegan's method would not work. So an empty bottle, ask yourself, what's the difference between an empty bottle and a bottle filled with stones? So the key idea here is that stones, they are actually denser, okay, than water, so it will sink. But in this case, an empty bottle is filled with air, and air is actually less dense than the stones. So therefore, it's able to float on the water. So because if this is your tank and your bottle is floating, right, then the amount of space or amount of water needed to fill up the tank would be the same, no difference. It's just that now your bottle is floating up in the air. So it's not really taking up any space. Alright, so the answer would look like, okay, the empty bottle will float on water. Make sure you tell me that it will float on water and not just on float. Many students will just say will float. Float on what? It's very important that we are specific. Hence, the bottle will not take up any space in the water. Okay. Okay, D. Keegan wanted to put a different object instead of plastic bottle filled with stones in the water tank to help reduce the amount of water used to flush. State a property of the material that the object is necessary to ensure the experiment will work. So the whole idea is it must be able to sink, right? That's our only criteria. Material of the object must sink in water. That's it. Next, 40. Okay. Gary prepared the circuit in setup 1 as shown below. He observed that only bulb P lit up. Okay, or lit up, sorry. He then exchanged L with M in a setup 2 and observed none of the light lit up. Okay. State whether L and M are conductors of electricity. Give a reason for your answer. So at first, they tell you that this is able to light up. So this tells me that L is actually a conductor of electricity. Why? Because it enables your electric current to pass through it, forming a closed circuit. Okay? Whereas in M, because it does not allow any electric current to flow through, we know that in this case, it's probably not a conductor of electricity, but an insulator. But let's see what happens in this case. So when you swap the two, alright, you know that this bulb is working fine because in setup 1, it lit up fine. But the only change that you made in this case was to swap the two. But yet it didn't lit up at all. So this tells me that, okay, this confirms that M, okay, is a insulator of electricity. Okay, but it also proves to me that maybe my bulb Q has fused. Why? Because we already ascertained that when L was here, there was no issue, right? So I know that this is a conductor of electricity. But when you look at here, I put L here, it still didn't light up, given that all the wires are connected properly. So this could mean that my bulb Q could also be fused. Alright? So let's move on to the question proper. So is L a conductor of electricity? Answer is yes. And the reason was because L formed a closed circuit and electricity was able to pass through L. to light up P. Okay, what about M? So remember the swap, it didn't work, so the answer is no. M formed an open circuit and electricity was not able to pass through M to light up P. So this format of answering, just in case you have forgotten, is actually CEO. C stands for whether the circuit is closed or open. E stands for whether or not electric current can flow through, and O, what is the outcome. So let me highlight for this. See, C is here, closed or open circuit. E is here, electric current was able to flow through or not. And the last part is your outcome. Okay, based on the question. Next, based on his observation, bulb P lit up in setup 1, but both bulbs did not lit up in setup 2. Explain why. So like I say, a possible reason could be that bulb Q has already fused. Okay? So we can say that bulb Q has fused, but bulb P is working fine. Okay, next, question 41. Okay, an experiment was used to investigate the condensation of water vapor, okay, on 2 glass cups. The same amount of hot water at 90 degrees and cold water at 10 degrees was poured into the glass cups. The glass cups were of the same thickness, size, and shape. The glass cups were placed in a science laboratory at a room temperature of 25 degrees. Now, whenever I see condensation, it tells me that there must be heat lost to a cooler surface. So it's very important for me to identify this cooler surface. Very, very important. I must know which part of it is at the cooler surface. So this is the hot water and this is the cold water. Okay, let's annotate this a little bit. So they told you that room temperature was 25 degrees Celsius. Hot water was at 90 degrees Celsius, and cold water was at 10 degrees Celsius, right? Okay, now then the question asks you, draw water droplets on the diagrams of both glass cups correctly to show where they would form after 5 minutes. So remember, you're talking about condensation, there must be heat loss. So we must also identify where is our water vapor coming from. So I know that there is water vapor in the air, and I also know that there's water vapor inside, but probably not a lot inside, okay, because rate of evaporation will be very slow due to the low temperature, okay. And besides that, okay, let's take a look at the comparison of temperatures. So I know that there must be some form of heat loss. So remember, heat always travels from a region of higher temperature to a region of lower temperature. So when you compare the outside environment to the inside of your cold water, you would notice that, okay, the water vapor that is in the surrounding air, because it's 25 degrees, is of a higher temperature as compared to the water, which is at 10 degrees. So therefore, I'm going to say that the water vapor here would have lost heat and condensed. So because it is on the outside, for this cup over here, okay, the water droplet should form on the outside. Now, because the glass cup we have lost heat to the cold water, it will also be colder. So maybe about, I won't say at 10 degrees, because it will have lost some heat. Maybe it could be at 15 degrees, but it is still lower than 25 degrees. So therefore, what actually happens is that the water vapor in the air would touch the cooler surface, okay, and then it will start to lose heat to the cooler surface, right? And then it will condense to form tiny water droplets, okay? So most of the water droplets will be formed in the area whereby you have your cold water. Maybe some might be here, okay, because ultimately your whole glass cup is going to be cooled, but the key idea is still at the region whereby the cold water is. Definitely most of it is here. Now, next, then you look at this, the hot water, okay? So the hot water, because it's hot, you have a lot of water vapor being formed. So this water vapor that is inside here will probably be at the temperature of maybe, let's just say, I don't know, maybe about 60 degrees, thereabout. Okay, since your hot water is at 90 degrees. Now your lid is actually much cooler than 60 degrees. So therefore, what happens is that the hot water vapor, okay, will touch the surrounding surfaces, lose heat, and then condense on the surfaces. Okay, so this is how it will look like. B. Based on your answer in part A, explain why water droplets will form at the area of glass cup containing hot and cold water. So glass cup containing hot water. Okay. So in this case, you have to talk about water cycle as well, because you need to explain where did the water vapor come from, right? So the first part to say is would be hot water evaporates into warm water vapor. Okay, then the warm water vapor would touch the cooler inner, please remember put the word inner, surface of the cup, loses heat, and condense into water droplets. So this is a very classic answer. Okay, the next one, similar thing, just that now you have to identify where is the source of water vapor. So in this case, like I tell you, it's from the surrounding air, right? So warmer water vapor from the surrounding air touches the cooler surface of the cup, loses heat, and condenses into water droplets. Okay. Alright, last question. Nurul filled up another identical glass with water at 25 degrees. So this is the difference. What observation would she make in the third glass cup after 5 minutes? So if you realize 25 degrees is actually the room temperature. So if the water is going to be at 25 degrees, then there'll be relatively no heat gain, no net heat gain or heat loss. So because it's the same temperature, therefore there's no water droplets. Okay? So you could say that no water droplets will be observed. On the glass cup as the water is the same temperature as the room. Okay, so because of the same temperature, there is no heat gain, no heat loss, or rather in this case, no heat loss. So therefore, there's no condensation. All right. So with that, before I end off, I have to talk about one thing. When you see, you cannot say things that no change or no difference. You can say remain the same, remain unchanged, but you cannot say no change or nothing will happen, because that is considered like a general answer. Just to add on for this last question. All right, so that's about it.